I want to talk today about an objection that I hear sometimes in dialogue or conversation with people about abortion. It doesn't even really qualify as a question. I ask people very early in our conversations, or make a point very early in the conversations, to get to the question of what is the unborn, to ask, would it be objectively wrong for you and I to kill each other? What I'm trying to get is a baseline. Do we agree in the objective immorality of killing other human beings? Almost everybody answers yes. Some people say no. If they say no, I don't keep arguing about abortion because we just have a different understanding of the morality of killing. And there we take a step back and have a worldview discussion. But almost everybody else says yes. And so we use that to drive them to the question of what is the unborn then? We both agree that it's wrong to kill each other. We both believe that there's something objectively wrong with killing other human beings. So what is it about them? What is it about the embryo or fetus that you think it's okay to kill them? What changed in your life from when you and I were once an embryo or a fetus to we're now the more mature human beings in front of each other that you think now it's wrong to kill each other, but it wasn't then? Now, when I ask that question, I sometimes get an objection that's not a question and response. It's what we call an argument from incredulity. It's an argument from disbelief. They say back to me, you can't possibly think that embryo or that fetus or that zygote, that single-celled organism is like us. You can't really believe that it's the same as we are. Now, that's an argument from disbelief, an argument from incredulity. It's also a little bit of an ad hominem. At the end of there, it's an unspoken, if you do, you're a moron kind of thing. But what I do is I try to direct them back because it's not an answer, it's an evasion. They're evading the question that I've asked, what changed, by throwing back disbelief that I could possibly believe we're the same. And I try to engage them in this dialogue. Sometimes I'll ask things like, well, let's imagine for a second that we had two men in a nursing home looking at a newborn. And when they look at that newborn who can't think, can't move on its own except for to roll around, all it does is sleep. If you've ever had a newborn in your house, as much as you love your newborn children, you know they're very limited in what they can do. They don't have the rational capacity to thought like you and I do. They don't understand that they exist in the same way that you and I do. Can you imagine two older men in a nursing home looking at them and talking to each other saying, you can't possibly think, one of them says to the other, that that's like us? Or think of two adults like my wife and I, who are sitting here on our deck together, looking at a toddler who lacks all sorts of capacities that we have as more mature adults and saying, one of us looking at the other and saying, you can't possibly think that that's like us. Or even two young people. Think about two teenagers entering into the prime of their life physically, looking at an older man who is suffering from dementia that doesn't have the same physical capacities or rational capacities or mental abilities or ability to access memory the ssame way they do, and saying, one of them saying to the other, you can't possibly believe that that guy's like us. In all of those cases, I think we would agree, and the people that I talk to agree and see, that the differences that we're talking about are real. We recognize that they are different, but that those differences don't raise to the level of being a justification for killing the other. The two elderly people looking at the baby, yeah, those differences are real. There's dramatic differences in their life, in the way that they operate, in the way that they function, but they don't rise to the level of being able to kill that newborn. Tracy and I are right to see differences between us and a toddler, but those aren't differences that would justify us killing that toddler. The two young people are right when they look at a patient that's suffering from dementia and recognize that that human being can no longer do the things that they can do. But it wouldn't be justification for killing. You see, I don't struggle to understand that a zygote is tremendously different from you and I, or that an embryo or a fetus have a lot of differences between us. But the question is there something the same about us? Do we share something? And we make the argument on this website, LTI makes the argument, Equal Rights Institute makes the argument, pro-life advocates make the argument, pro-life philosophers like Francis Beckwith and Christopher Kaiser have made this argument. Steve Jacobs in his PhD research at University of Chicago has made this argument with a great deal of success, that science teaches us from the moment that we come into existence, we're a whole, distinct, and living human organism. A human life begins at fertilization. In Steve Jacobs' research, he had 96% of academic biologists agree that a mammal's life begins at fertilization, and human beings are mammals. So abortion is a destructive destructive action against another human life. So the question is not, do I see the differences, but do I see a similarity? I see another human life. We share a human identity. And what my point isn't that I don't see the difference between a zygote, an embryo, a fetus, a newborn, and me, or an elderly person. I see all of those differences. I understand that's why we call them the developmental stages of human life. My point is that those differences don't justify killing other human beings. Not when we're talking about an adult versus the elderly, or an adult versus a newborn. In none of those cases would we look at it and say that's a justification for killing. See, the problem is that you're looking at the differences and thinking that those differences excuse an action, a lethal action against another human being. I see those same differences, but I see one single similarity that I believe is more important than all the rest: our shared humanity. Because I believe the best explanation for our sense of universal human dignity, the universal human rights that we appeal to when we look at other nations and say that's wrong, you should never treat another human being the way that those people are treating them. It doesn't matter what culture you live in. It doesn't matter what religion you were brought up in. It doesn't matter what race you are. You should never be treated like that. When we have that intuition, we're appealing to something like universal human dignity, universal human rights, the idea that there's something about us that makes us valuable. And I believe in what Christopher Kaiser calls an inclusive view of human value, that all human beings ought to be included in that family that we think that we have obligations and duties to. And so when they say, you can't possibly believe that they're like us, my response is, yeah, I do. Well, sure, there's differences, just like there's differences in all those other things I talked about. But those differences aren't relevant to the point that it's justification for killing. Not with any other human being, so I shouldn't apply it to them in the same way that, or in a different way that I would apply it to anybody else. If I don't think that those differences in capacities translate into justification for killing human beings, where I do see that massive chasm of capacities and functionality, then why am I applying that same standard to them when they have the single most important characteristic or quality that I'm looking for to restrain my behavior towards another? They are full members of the human family from the moment they come into existence. So the argument from incredulity says you can't possibly believe they're the same. And my response is, I do believe they're the same in one important way. I see all of the other differences, but I see one similarity, and it's that similarity, that sameness, that shared human nature, that same quality that demands that I restrain my behavior towards them. This has been Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. Have a great day.